Laura will be giving us a talk on narratology in early modern medical manuscripts, the case of London, Wellcome Library, which isn't very far away from here.
Yeah.
So over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning. The term narratology can be employed in a number of different senses, from very narrow to quite broad. In this paper, a broader view is held, and narrative is envisioned as pervasive and all-encompassing, including both fiction and non-fiction. Narrative structures are crucial for ordering time and space, thus allowing for the construction of meaning in general. As White contends, quote, "Far from being one code among many that a culture may utilize for endowing experience with meaning, narrative is a meta-code, a human universal on the basis of which transcultural messages about the nature of a shared reality can be transmitted," end of quote. In the history of English scientific writing, narratives can be linked to specific genres. For instance, learned texts for medical doctors were different from those targeting lay audiences. The focus of my study is a particular type of medical narrative, that of recipe collections in early modern English. To this end, the text contained in London Wellcome Library manuscript 213, which dates from the beginning of the 17th century and has been attributed to a woman, is taken into consideration. The recipe text type goes back to Old English and gained popularity in the following centuries. Medical recipes were, in fact, quote, "one of the most frequently copied text types in late medieval England," end of quote. They have received due scholarly interest over the last decades. In the early modern period, the role and function of medical recipes have also been dealt with. However, little attention has traditionally been paid to scientific and technical texts addressed to and written by women in this period, a gap which some of these studies have started to fill. According to Leong, the, quote, "early modern domestic space has come under increasing scrutiny as a site of knowledge production," end of quote. This is materialized in the evidence contained in recipe books. In such a space, women played an important part as providers of information. The objective of this paper, then, is to identify and examine narrative forms and functions, as well as particular features in the collection of recipes housed in Wellcome 213, which can contribute to the knowledge of recipes written by and for women during the early modern period. Wellcome 213 holds a collection of medical recipes and household recipes in English. It is described in the library catalogue of the Wellcome collection after the words appearing on the first page of the manuscript, which you can see on the slides, as a book of diverse medicines, broths, salves, waters, syrups, and ointments, of which many of, or the most part, have been experienced and tried by the special practice of Mrs Corlyon. Anno Domini 1606. Apart from putting forward the main contents, this brief description provides the exact date of composition. The description is preceded by the words Liber Comitisae Arundeliae, that is, Book of the Countess of Arundel, at the top of the page, a reference to the owner of the book. It is not clear who this Mrs Corlyon was, but it has been speculated that she may have had a connection with the Arundel family. In any case, from the words in the description, it can be ruled out that Mrs Corlyon was the inventor of the recipes. She seems to have been the experiencer. As is the case of many collections of this type, recipes gathered knowledge of previous generations together with that of contemporary networks. The manuscript has an original gilt stamp binding with a central arabesque ornament, which has on each side the letter A. I don't know if you can see it. Yes. The AA monogram is another overt mark of ownership, which confirms that the manuscript belonged to Alethea Howard, Countess of Arundel. It is thought to have been a wedding gift from Anne Howard, Alethea's mother-in-law, on the occasion of her marriage to his son Thomas in 1606, which is actually the year which appears on the first page of the manuscript. This would discard Alethea as the author of the manuscript in favor of Anne, who was, and I quote, an amateur healer and a prolific collector of manuscript receipts, end of quote. Alethea was also a specialist in domestic medicine and a collector of medical and culinary recipes. In fact, her collection of recipes, including the contents of Wellcome 213, as well as other material, was published as a posthumous book in London in 1655, standing out as one of the first printed recipe books which was officially written by a woman. Wellcome 213 displays two different paginations at the top right-hand side of the page. The first, which is the original one, is contemporaneous with the text and includes 342 pages. The second one, probably carried out by the staff at the Wellcome collection, is in pencil and only appears on odd pages. This new pagination consists of 194 pages, and I will use the original system, the old pagination, for reference in my paper. For the text, blank ink is employed, whereas chapter titles, recipe headings, and some initial letters or words of recipes are in red ink or rubricated. Red may also be used for individual words within a recipe for emphasis and for catchwords. The whole text is within red rules. This suggests a conscientious process of copying. The handwriting of the text is good and careful. The volumes consist of 25 chapters, each dealing with recipes for specific parts of the body, particular ailments, and medical preparations. The recipes are aimed at treating a range of illnesses, from common to severe. After each chapter, several pages have been intentionally blank so that new recipes could be added in the future. As for hands, the main one found in most of the manuscript is tidy and clear. Several pages show recipes by different hands. The name Lady Winwood appears after the heading of the recipe on page 179, and My Lady of Bookness receipt can be found at the end of page 180. On page 318, there are two other recipes by a different hand in Latin, preceded by the heading My Lady Winwood's Pills for the Spleen and Against Melancholy. Other pages at the end of the manuscript contain additional recipes by different hands, also mentioning different names, mainly women's, such as the Countess of Kent and Mrs. Stafford. Concerning the methodology, my study stems from previous work carried out for several research projects, which have crystallized in the Málaga corpus of early modern English scientific prose. The corpus, which is POS tagged, consists of early modern English technical prose from the Hunterian collection at Glasgow University Library, the Wellcome collection at London, and the Rylands collection at the University of Manchester Library. Furthermore, the digitized images of the manuscripts can be consulted along with their corresponding semi-diplomatic transcriptions. In my transcription of Wellcome 213, I have followed the tenets of the semi-diplomatic model, which proposes a faithful rendering of the original text. They involve keeping the original spelling, punctuation, capitalization, word division, layout with respect to lines or line arrangements, etc., as well as indicating editorial intervention, for example, by using italics to mark expanded abbreviations. The recipes relating to medical problems in the head corresponding to the first 5 chapters have been selected for the investigation. They amount to 62 recipes, 26 recipes for the eyes, 18 for the head, 6 for the ears, 3 for the face, and 9 for the teeth. I will move on now to the analysis. Gorlach divided the features of the recipe into 4 main groups of categories. They are well-definedness on macro and micro levels, social, linguistic, and technical. Welcome to 1.3 meets the criteria proposed by Gorlach at the macro and micro levels. With regards to the former, the whole manuscript is devoted to recipes and is meant as a collection of them. Those recipes dealing with parts of the body have been arranged following the medieval decapite ad pedem structure from head to foot. This organizational pattern shows influence from the learned tradition of medical texts. At the micro level, the recipes follow a similar structure, are rubricated in red ink and centered heading, which states the purpose of the recipe, followed by the main text in a different paragraph and in black ink. In the text, the procedure, ingredients, utensils, application, and administration involved in the preparation of the remedy are detailed, as illustrated in the example on the slide. A medicine for the redness of the eyes without pain. Take pieces of fine manchet, good quality wheat bread of 1 inch thick, being the breadth of your eye, or bigger, and cut holes in the middle of them. Then dry them before the fire, but make them not brown. Put them in fair running water, and when they are soft, lay them upon your eyes, and after they have lain an hour, bind them fast to your eyes with a cloth. This must be done when you go to bed, and in the morning wash your eyes with fair water and lie still an hour after. Other types of optional information may be provided. One of these involves storage and conservation time, as in the example on the slide. When it is cold, pour the clearest into a glass and keep it in a cold place, and it will last 3 weeks in winter and 14 days in the summer. Sometimes the effectiveness of the remedies is overtly expressed by means of efficacy phrases. This kind of tag phrases occurs in 33 of the recipes examined, normally at the end. Some of them are general. For instance, this has been approved and it will help you. Some efficacy phrases are more specific to the medical problem for which the remedy seeks a solution. For example, and it will procure you to sleep, or and it will help the pain of the head. Reference to God, common in medieval recipes, is also found in efficacy phrases, and it will help if God will. As for social category, taking into account the background of the owner of the manuscript, it can be assumed that the recipes were addressed to an aristocratic readership to provide cures in a family context. It may be unlikely that the Countess of Arundel herself was physically involved in the preparation of the recipes, but she would have instructed and overseen her staff. The narrative elements allude to the recipes or teachings of other women, for instance, Mrs Maynard, which links to the idea of the recipe genre as a venue to exchange knowledge and expertise. The linguistic features put forward by Gorlach are form of the heading, full sentences or telegram style, use of imperative or other verbal forms, use of possessive pronouns with ingredients and implements, deletion of objects, temporal sequence and possible adverbs used, complexity of sentences, and finally, marked use of long words and of genteel diction. As far as the form of the heading is concerned, the most common pattern is for it to start with a medicine to or a medicine for, as in the examples that you can see on the slide. The noun medicine may be modified by an adjective, a medicine good, a good medicine, to emphasize the validity of the remedy, or to indicate sequence, for example, a third medicine to procure sleep. Sentences in the recipes are complete and a telegram style is avoided. Coordination is prevalent with the conjunction and being frequently employed to connect sentences. Other coordinating conjunctions are but and or. The imperative is the most common verbal form employed. Hence, the narrative recipes shows a clear instructional purpose, where directions are provided to inform about how to prepare medicines, syrups, creams, etc. Second person possessive pronouns appear with ingredients, preparations, and utensils. They succeed in making the recipes more personalized. Regarding temporal sequence, the narrative elements are presented chronologically. First, the procedure including all the relevant steps in the making of the remedy with the ingredients is carefully explained. This comprises actions such as boiling, heating, melting, grinding, mixing, distilling, beating, etc. Then the application and or administration is specified, and finally, further data about storage or effectiveness may be supplied. This logical ordering can be strengthened by means of temporal adverbs such as then and after. Finally, concerning the technical category, in Wellcome 213, measures are generally expressed by handfuls and spoonfuls. Weights are only sporadically mentioned. In this respect, reference to quantities is not very precise. A fact which contrasts with late Middle English medical recipes, particularly those embedded in specialized treatises, which included standard apothecaries' weights, usually abbreviated by means of symbols. Specification is more detailed for times and frequency of application and or administration, as can be seen in the examples on the slide. The ingredients are mainly herbal. Usual commodities found in households such as sugar, salt, eggs, honey, vinegar are common as well. Animal and human-derived ingredients may also form part of the remedies, such as worms and women's milk. As for the type of instruments needed for the recipes, they may be present in any households. The recipes in Wellcome 213 may have been collected from oral sources and or from other manuscripts. They contain specialized and verified knowledge, since this has been passed on and validated through generations. The recipe book can be considered a type of codifying writing in which, and I'll quote, the acquired knowledge of a discipline is presented as generally accepted and valid, end of quote. Narrative forms are relevant to codifying texts and are systematic in Wellcome 213. They are present at the supra and intratextual levels. Supratextual devices include the disposition of chapter and recipe headings, as well as the layout of recipes on the page. Both chapter and recipe headings are rubricated, which may be regarded as decoration, but also as a help to find the relevant information easily. With respect to the layout, recipes are neatly organized. The text is kept within the rules margins, as I said before, and recipes are relatively short. The longest one occupies 40 lines, whereas the shortest one takes 3, being the average number of lines 11. The discursive structure of recipes follows a set of stages, which continues that of the medieval tradition. The arrangement of information is standardized, following a logical and chronological rationale. At the linguistic level, since recipes are informative texts, they tend to be linguistically explicit. Therefore, objects of transitive verbs as well as pronouns are expressed. All the aspects discussed so far make the narrative structure of recipes cohesive and well assembled. And I will end my presentation with some concluding remarks. The recipes analyzed in Wellcome 213 show distinct narrative forms such as coherent organizational patterns and layout, consistent configuration of the headings, use of full sentences, coordination and imperative forms of the verb, clear temporal sequence, among others, that help to transmit the information contained in them and make of the recipe a clear-cut text type whose main function is instructional. The texts are filled with practical knowledge useful for the running of a household and also enable us to outline social and cultural trends. Thus, in the 17th century, medicinal preparations that could be made at home allowed for a self-help culture that continued to develop in the following centuries. Their compilation into recipe books created and used by women in the 17th century are chronicles of life. Recipes were a means to amass, retain, and exchange knowledge and experiences and bear witness to, quote, the complex and elaborate tasks of the early modern gentlewoman, the preparation of preserves, confections, sweet meats, and medicines, end of quote, and to their reading practices. Accordingly, manuscripts reveal themselves as historical documents that can be relevant to interdisciplinary research on linguistics, gender studies, book history, to name but a few. Further investigation on aspects only briefly mentioned, such as the names appearing in some of the recipes and the different hands found in the manuscript, will be carried out in the future in order to try to shed more light on historical writing by women. And the last slides contain the references that have come up during the presentation. I am afraid that they are a little bit cramped with information, so if you need any of these, I will be happy to provide it. So thank you very much for listening.
Which of course is very interesting to link back to Eleanor's presentation where you mentioned the role of women, and here we see it. It strikes me that in the manuscript, the role of women, of course, there are lots of implications about the role of women, and I wonder if you could say a little bit more about it, because I could see women licensing authority, say through their titles. So Arundel is probably the owner of this book, it's her castle or whatever this happens in. And somehow her title there is the authority, but then within the texts you get Mrs. somebody, and this recipe seems to be her recipe that's coming in. And then I suppose there's an implication here from what you're saying that it's also assumed that women are the readers of the text as it's part of household governance, and they'll be doing the preparation of this. So have you thought about the different ways in which the text give us insight into the role of women in medicine in the early modern period?
Yes, thank you very much. In different layers, women as compilers of the recipes, women as users of the recipes, and women as writers of the recipes. Okay, so at this point, I am still researching all these different names, because as I have said, this is knowledge transmitted through generations. So here we have different generations of women passing on their expertise, passing on their knowledge.
Are there any examples where you can find the same recipes in earlier manuscripts? So this is about the transmission of knowledge, you're right. Can you sort of see the genealogy of the knowledge, so to speak, at all in the data?
In this manuscript specifically, I haven't so far. I intend to do that, but I have worked with medieval manuscript, with Middle English manuscripts, and I have been able to trace. I have been able to find like several manuscripts with the same recipes. But I'm still, I'm working with this one and still working with it. So like this is work in progress, and I still have to trace the transmission of the recipes and of the text.
Please.
I was intrigued by the sort of leaving blank space at the end to fill in whatever new recipes you come across.
Yes, yes.
But did you notice, is it the same hand, or who do you think wrote the new recipes? And are they all from the early, say, the 17th century, or how late do you think some of the editions could be?
Taking into account, thank you very much for your question. Taking into account the handwriting, they seem to be from the 17th century. There is also a recipe in Latin, or two recipes in Latin. But as I said, this is like my goals for future research to analyze those hands. But most of the recipes are by the same hand. But after each chapter, we find like several pages which have been left blank with the intention of providing or each generation adding more recipes.
It's a lovely idea that your mother-in-law gives it to you as a wedding present. Sort of, I'm giving you the beginning, but you need to add on to this.
But that is really the evidence, as far as I know. During generations, the mother, the taught son, the grandmother, they pass on the book and they read, even for centuries, right?
Yes.
And that's excellent examples when you look at that.
I suppose it's a sort of written version of what the oral tradition must have been like, where people added to it through time. Yeah. No.
Yes, my question so is connected with this, and thank you very much for this very accurately researched talk. But how common are the explanations of the provenance of recipes? Who gave them, what their histories were? You showed one example, but are there several? Is that very rare?
Well, the
recipe comes from.
Yes. No, I mean, supposedly these are recipes compiled by Alethea's mother-in-law, Anne Dacre, but I don't know the source from which she took the recipes yet.
And you are going to
yes, yes, that's my next step, researching that.
Yes. And the text is largely silent on this, so it'll take a lot of careful scholarship to try and just give it a sort of genealogy of knowledge.
Yes. Thank you.
Elements.
I was thinking about the contemporary equivalents to this, because of course the internet is awash with self-help home remedies, and I'm thinking nowadays sometimes they're meant to be alongside sort of mainstream medicine. Sometimes they're a replacement. Other people try to cure cancer with ginger or something like that. And then increasingly, I mean, I don't have research evidence of this, but because of difficulties accessing health services, including in this country, and sometimes the cost of them, people are going to sort of try much more to manage their conditions at home. So I was just wondering whether you or anybody are looking at comparing the kind of data you have with contemporary current home self-help medicine online.
Thank you very much. That's a good idea that I will take into account. I haven't done that so far, but
and some are endorsed by celebrities, of course. So the whole thing about give credence to the same. I think it would be really interesting.
Thank you very much.
Further evidence that things don't change. Every time you get the technology change, that's the social practices are very similar. That's the second time I've had that anecdote from the previous talk. I'm going to have 20 years of the co-construction of knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.